Hey, welcome to our Accelerate Fair Housing webinar. I am Angela Paoli, Vice President of Education and Broker Development for Ad Properties Christie's International Real Estate. I have two amazing guests here today. I have Rachel Scheid. Hey, Rachel, want to turn on your video and pop in and say hi?
Good morning.
Good morning. We had fun tech problems this morning, so here we are. I'm super excited. And then I
Monday.
also have Betsy Urbans from Illinois Realtors. If she could pop on her video and say hello to Betsy. Hey, Betsy, how
Hello,
are you?
everyone.
Thanks for being here today. So today we have a really good webinar planned full of information that I think is super helpful and super important for all of us. We are talking all things fair housing today. So fair housing is essential in real estate because it ensures that everyone has equal access to housing opportunities, regardless of anything else, right? It helps create inclusive communities, protects people from discrimination that can limit their quality of life. So we really at Ad Properties, we honor Fair Housing Month, and we believe it's super important and crucial. It raises awareness, reinforces our commitment to equal rights, and also encourages continued progress towards equitable housing for everybody. So I've always said that there are certain things that don't belong in real estate, and there's like a laundry list of them, in my opinion. But things like religion, discrimination, bias, politics, that's a big one, right, Rachel? But these kinds of things don't belong in real estate. And what really does belong in real estate is customer service to the client and doing right by people. And I think that we all have good intentions, but there's so much legislation and so much gray area in our industry. There's so much information when it comes to like rules and regulations and how we're supposed to be operating. And sometimes, admittedly, it's hard to stay on top of all that. So I think having webinars like this, where we can truly help educate you so you can learn information and take it right out into the field with you and make sure that you are operating and abiding by all things right when it comes to fair housing. So our goal for you today is for you to leave our webinar with some knowledge, feeling confident. If you have questions, reach out to us afterwards because we're happy to help you. And just, operating your everyday in the best manner possible and treating people right. So I want to make one point before we start rolling. I want you guys to put any questions in the chat. I will try to keep my eye on it. My tech is a little funky today, but we'll figure it out. And we'll have some time at the end for like an open Q&A. So I want to get rolling. I want to introduce our panelists. I'll give you guys each a minute to talk about yourself. We have Miss Rachel Scheid. She is our Vice President of Brokerage Services and co-managing broker of 3 of our city offices, East Lincoln Park, Gold Coast, and Bronzeville. So Rachel, want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Um, a whole minute to talk about myself?
Yeah, whatever.
I'm really excited. For those of you who follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you see I do a lot of posting during Fair Housing Month. It is, I feel, one of the most, if not the most important months in our industry to pay attention to. And so I'm just really thrilled to be here with all of you today with Angela and Betsy to hopefully give you some great education, some tips and tricks moving forward, and of course, raise awareness.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Rachel has just a ton of experience and information when it comes to fair housing. So I'm super excited to have you on today's panel. So then we have our special guest, Miss Betsy Urbans, Illinois Realtors General Counsel and VP of Legal Services. Betsy, do you want to hop on and say hi and give a little intro?
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
So, all right, intro. Well, I'm Betsy Urbans, and I've been around the industry for over 30 years now, serving as Illinois Realtors legal hotline attorney for a mere 24 years. And then since 2018, I've been in-house general counsel. It's the honor of a lifetime to be able to serve this industry, which I've grown to love so much, especially because we're such humongous advocates for housing for everyone. That is our mantra, housing. It's that simple. Well, I wish it were that simple, but our project is to make it more simple, more accessible, and create opportunities for all. So that is essentially one of my missions, aside from serving Illinois Realtors as my client. But I sure do appreciate the invitation to be with all of you here today, and let's get rolling. Plus that song, dude, that's my favorite song right now. So I just wanted you all to listen to that in its entirety again. It's awesome.
Yeah, that was a great song. I
dancing
was like,
before the
this is perfect to open our webinar with. Thank you so much for being with us. I've heard Betsy's name hundreds of times throughout my career in real estate, so it was really cool to finally get to meet you, Betsy. So we're happy to have you here with us today. I would love to start loosely with what does fair housing mean to you? So Rachel, I'd like to start with you. What is your answer to that?
Thank you. I had to do a whole bunch of notes because if you're one of my agents, I tend to woo sometimes. But fair housing to me really just means equitable access to safe and secure housing for everyone. I really believe that housing is a right, not a luxury, and should be something that everyone can access. I think for me, I didn't really understand that when I first got licensed, right? I didn't really understand the history of fair housing. I didn't really understand what we as realtors have a responsibility to do. And I really came into that maybe my third or fourth year with this realization of how historically realtors in the real estate industry is why fair housing has to exist, right? The discrimination that our predecessors and frankly, some of our current practitioners utilize on a daily basis is really why it's important to educate ourselves, understand that now with this license, we have a responsibility to right the wrongs of the past and really set us all on a better future. So that's what fair housing means to me.
Awesome. Betsy, what about you?
what she said. But seriously, I always try to boil things down into the mission statement, right? So equal opportunity for and access to housing for all in capital letters, underlined several times. We're working on it. I think sadly that's aspirational, but it's still the mission. So that's kind of what it means to me.
Thank you. So two different perspectives, and same for me too. I just always look at real estate like we're in a people business, and this is about people, right? It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, right? It should be equitable for everybody. So same, I have the same answer too. I want to roll into a couple other really good meaty questions that I feel are helpful for our agents. So Betsy, you serve as General Counsel and VP of Legal Services for Illinois Realtors. Can you share with us some examples of fair housing violations you've seen from realtors? I know they span the gamut. I am sure you could tell stories for hours and hours and hours. But I think what is helpful for our agents is maybe give us a little rundown of some of the most common violations that you see, that we've probably come across in our own business, just to make it relatable for our agents, and just give us a few examples of those.
Right. I think the two biggest ones that we're going to talk about in more detail a little bit later, but the biggest ones that are coming through our hotline right now, and we feel like the legal hotline, Vicki Munson is our awesome legal hotline attorney. So we'll probably mention that as a resource again, but for all y'all, it's a really good resource if you have questions at all. And she's Monday through Friday, 9 to 4, I think, are the hours. But the two biggest that touch on fair housing questions that we're getting, again, we're going to talk about them more, are the source of income, as it's a new protected class in Illinois under the Illinois Human Rights Act. It went into effect Jan 1, 23. It's been a protected class under local ordinances in both Chicago and Cook County. And then there are, I think it's been Champaign-Urbana, there's a couple, 3 other places where it was protected prior to becoming a statewide protected class. So that would be discrimination based on how you pay your rent or your mortgage. The biggest one is the Housing Choice Voucher, Section 8. which if you're reading the news today, all those things are in question, which is concerning. But nevertheless, that's one of the biggest issues. And then the other one has to do with animals, emotional support animals and service animals. And the only thing I'll say right now, we'll talk a little bit more about them later in the program, but they're not pets. It's kind of that simple. So they're an extension of their person. So we'll talk about more, but those are the two really big ones right now.
I guess I've never looked at it that way, that a service animal is an extension of the person. That really makes it clear, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And in housing, they're like the emotional support animals are dealt with a little bit differently than service animals. Service animals are trained under the federal law. Service animals are dogs. That's under ADA. ADA, the American or excessive, the American Disability
Act.
something Act.
Act.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know, I have it written down
For
somewhere.
administration.
But I only speak in what are they called when they're look, I'm turning all red. What's the word for, 62 years old, I lose the words for when you use
Like an abbreviation?
yeah, the abbreviation instead of the word, like EEOC and
Yeah.
ADA. So it's the ADA, it's the federal law. And so that is accessibility it's for public accessibility. All things that are open to the public should be available. Fair housing is a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit stricter because it's housing. So, the emotional support animals get pretty good treatment when it's housing. So.
Yeah, and we'll get into more on the animal topic in a little
Yeah.
bit, guys.
Yeah, stay tuned.
And
It's
then
a teaser. That's a teaser.
Yeah, and speak a little bit to some violations that historically have been acceptable, but maybe now we should think twice before we use them. Give us a few examples of those.
Okay, well, the one that is, okay, so one to dovetail on source of income, if you're outside Chicago or Cook County where that source of income has been protected, it was not protected elsewhere by state law in Illinois. So a housing provider could make a decision as long as the housing provider was consistent about the decision making to not take part in a housing choice voucher program or Section 8. And as long as they consistently did it and didn't say, no, we're doing it for some and not for others, they could choose whether or not. And that would be true for property managers and for owners and for anybody that when I say housing provider, I mean the whole universe of people that deal with folks looking for housing. And so that was acceptable. After Jan 1, 2023, that is no longer the case. You can't choose. And as we will see later, again, teaser, folks have been getting caught in that. So that's probably the biggest and most obvious one.
Mhm.
Now, if you want to talk about if we're getting into like kind of the historical terms that were used in advertising, are we
Yeah.
there maybe?
Yep.
Okay, so you would see like this is a difficult one, like people advertising that there's a master bedroom. Is that a violation of fair housing law? Technically, no, it isn't. And I will tell you the origin of the use of that term is from the 1920s in the Sears catalog when they're advertising their new houses. So they were trying to think of some like fancy term for the cool bedroom that might even have a bathroom.
Mm.
So while technically not a violation of laws, probably there are better terms to use. Primary suite, owner's bedroom, So that's not technically a violation of the law. Clearly a violation of the law that had been acceptable historically was like no fill in the blank with the protected classes allowed.
Mm.
That is clearly, you're describing the people that are looking for the housing. And the bottom line is describe the property. You know, if you're describing the property accurately, that's, you know, don't, smokers aren't a protected class, but don't, instead of saying no smokers, say smoke free. You can do that. Smoking is not protected, and it doesn't matter what you're smoking. If it's legal, you can still have smoke-free property, right?
Right.
You can name places. You know, if you're describing something as near St. James Catholic Church or the synagogue, if that's the name of the location, you can use that. But you wouldn't say Jewish neighborhood,
Right.
right? So those are just kind of some examples. There are laws, obviously, the fair housing laws apply in advertising. So do not describe a person that is either prohibited or preferred
Right.
in a particular area. Describe the property. You know, school districts, good schools. Well, what's a good school to you might be different for me. So I think the overarching theme that you'll hear again and again throughout this program, and then I'll stop talking, but is to not presume your own intrinsic beliefs, needs, or wants on your client or your
Right.
customer
Or the public.
or the public.
Right.
Send them to objective sources of information for school information. Send them to objective sources of information for crime
Right.
stats, you know, and we'll talk about how people got caught like trying to be helpful, but not later.
Right.
So does that
And
all
I think
make sense?
the main takeaway there is describe the property, not the person. Right.
Describe the property, not the person.
Right.
And
And your
don't
opinions.
impose your
Right.
own ideals or thoughts or biases on your client.
Right.
What's best for them? Let them direct you.
Right. Right. Well, I honestly think that's the whole theme of fair housing, right?
Yes,
Is
it
what's
is.
best for the
Yes.
person, regardless of anything
Right.
else, right?
Right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that information. So Rachel, I want to pivot to you quick. You mentioned that one of the most common questions you get is about pets, and I know you're just like a chock full of information about pets and service animals. So let's talk a little bit about that. Support animal versus, pet. Go talk a little bit around the rules around that and how it's handled within fair housing. So shoot.
Sure, thank you. So like Betsy kind of said already, support and service animals are not considered pets. So automatically, if there is a no pets policy within a residential living facility, building, anything like that, it doesn't apply to service animals or assistance animals. So service animals are trained to perform a very specific task for the person they are assisting. They are not considered pets. They are protected federally by the ADA, and they have to be dogs according to the ADA. So that's sort of the service animal. And most often, service animals, you can tell right away because they're typically wearing a specific harness that will say that they are service animals, okay? Assistance animals can be any animal that provides assistance. It can be that tarantula. It can be that 12-foot snake. I don't know why you would do that, but it could be, right? It could be a bunny
Describe
rabbit.
the person.
Right, exactly. It could be a bumblebee, I guess, I suppose, right? So they do perform a task or emotional support for the person with a disability. There's no special training necessary, and they are protected by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, so HUD, and FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, okay? So those are what we're talking about in terms of these two animals, okay? It is a civil rights violation under the Illinois Human Rights Act to refuse to rent or to otherwise discriminate in housing against a person who has a disability because they have a guide, hearing, or support animal. Okay, so the biggest question I get a lot of time usually is rentals, okay? But there are definitely condo buildings out there that say they have no pets policy, all right? And then inevitably you have somebody come through who's an applicant or they're looking to buy in the building and they disclose that they have a service animal or a support animal, so an assistance animal. Your job as the realtor is to make sure that your client understands they cannot discriminate, they cannot refuse to rent or to sell to that individual because of the status of their assistant or service animal. If their credit doesn't line up, if their eviction history doesn't line up, right? Those are valid reasons. And keep in mind, the big thing with fair housing, as with frankly anything in our industry, is what we do for one, we do for all. So if your client is going to have for a landlord example, if they're going to have a credit score minimum, that better be posted in broker remarks, at least at minimum, to say, because when that individual with an assistance animal comes and it doesn't post anywhere that there is a minimum credit score, and then you deny them because of a credit score issue that you never disclosed and you're not holding anyone else up to, potentially you have a discrimination case on your hands, right? So those are some of the really big things to think about. You are able, this question I get a lot when it comes to assistance animals, okay, especially because with assistance animals, let's say the disability might not be as obvious as a service animal, okay? And so a lot of questions back are, well, my landlord wants to see XYZ. My landlord wants to know why they need this animal. And so I just wanted to kind of give you guys the exact nomenclature to go back into. But if the individual is asking for an accommodation because of their service animal, which would be it's a no pets building, right, or a no pets unit, and they're asking for an accommodation to allow their assistance animal, and the individual's disability is not obvious or known, the housing provider may ask for an explanation of how the request is related to the individual's disability and may ask for reliable documentation verifying that the individual has a disability. They cannot ask what the disability is, but they can ask for a certificate to say this is actually an assistance animal, right? This is actually a service animal. So they are able to do that. They do not have to. The words are very clearly may, but I will say it's very clearly spelled out. They cannot ask what the disability is, right? You also, as a housing provider, cannot charge additional fees if they have an assistance or service animal. So you cannot charge pet rent. You cannot charge a non-refundable pet deposit, okay? Even if you had listed pets allowed with non-refundable pet deposit, all right, that doesn't apply because keep in mind, service animals and assistance animals are not pets. They are essentially employees, right? Like that's
Yeah,
kind of
like Betsy said, like an extension of the person.
exactly, exactly.
Right.
So those are some really like hot take things. Now, if you like are looking this and Googling through, Illinois has just like tons. I also we're going to send out a robust email after this that has a pamphlet from the Secretary of State's office that I refer to, and I email off to like managing brokers. I've emailed off to agents all the time. It's just a really great FAQ on exactly what your landlord needs to do. And if your landlord or housing provider is giving you as the agent a hard time, let's not forget that our obligation per our listing agreement and our buyer broker agreement or tenant rep agreement is that we have to abide by fair housing. And we're telling our client they have to do the same. So if you're in a situation where your client is pushing back at you, they don't want to listen to you, they want to argue with you, that's an immediate call to your managing broker. Immediate. That would be 9 out of 10 times. By the time I'm getting a call, the agent's trying to do the right thing. The client is not. So definitely give us a call in that.
Hey, Rachel, we have a question in the chat that I think makes sense to go through now. Patrick asked, can a building/association charge the annual pet fee? Sounds like no based on this info.
Not for an assistance or service animal. Again, they are not classified as pets.
I will interject, however, that at the end of the lease or upon the termination of the ownership of that person that's leaving the unit, they can charge, it would typically be in a lease situation, for damages. So,
Correct.
just like they would any other tenant.
The important thing to remember is that the person is still responsible for their animal, right? So if their animal destroys property, if their animal in the vestibule does something, they are still responsible as the tenant to take care of that and to remedy that situation.
The person needs to be able to handle that animal. So a point like people want to discriminate against certain types of animals. Like I would want to discriminate against snakes, but I couldn't, I suppose. And like the pit bulls and the Rottweilers. But the question is that animal dangerous? And can the owner or the assisted person handle that? And there are cases out there where some can and some can't. So, but you
Right.
look at the
That's like,
individual animal and not the type.
that's that gray area, right?
Yep.
We have an iPhone user who said, do these rules apply when renting to someone who will be living in a 2-unit building where I live?
That is one exception to situations where if there's an owner occupied exception to some of the rules. So, but be careful because you can't advertise by publication that unit. So, I mean, if you're gonna discriminate on any basis, whether it's an animal, however, you're going to look for a particular, the owner occupied is an exemption. You can never discriminate based on race, but other protected classes, you essentially could if you live on the other side, but you cannot advertise it. You can't use a broker to assist you. You can't publish in any sort of media. You just have to do word of mouth, find somebody.
Right.
Yep.
We have another good question from Gabby. What proof of the animal being a support animal can the landlord ask for, and who provides it?
So
Rachel,
they
you
can
wanna?
ask, yeah, they can ask for a certification, right, to verify that the individual has a disability that then this animal is trained to support, whether it's emotional. What they cannot ask for is, why do you need that dog? Why do you need that snake? What's wrong with you, right?
Right.
And so there are technically you have to get your assistance animal classified as an assistance animal, and that's the certificate.
Right.
For
So
emotional support, I think that, I'm sorry to interrupt, I think
No,
it
please.
that's
may or
okay.
may not be true. In Illinois, what you need to look at is the Assistance Animal Integrity Act, and I apologize if you've already referred to that, Rachel. But that is a relatively new statute in Illinois that does give some guidance to housing providers as far as what they can ask for. And they're asking for like you said, if it's not obvious, you're asking for a very basic level of documentation from whomever your relationship is with. It could be a doctor, it could be a therapist, it could be counselor, but that says, look, this person has a therapeutic need. We have a therapeutic relationship. What this act is trying to cut down on is the niche market out there for the internet certificate.
That's what I was
Like
gonna say. Like, what if they
Bobo
just,
is certificated.
right? What if they just provide
That,
some random online certificate? Like, how
yeah,
far does
that's
that go?
going to be looked at with a jaundiced eye under the Illinois Assistance Animal Integrity Act.
Yeah. God, the questions about animals are pouring in, so let's just keep them coming.
Animals are the thing. Well,
In a
yeah.
no pet building likely to keep common area clean, can they be required to use the service elevator or use a back door, etc.?
God, I wouldn't.
I
just,
mean, we're going to get into reasonable
yeah,
accommodations and
we're
modifications
going to
in
get
a
into
little
fact
bit
questions.
to
Right.
that. But listen, I think like let's go back to what we said at the beginning, equitable and equal access.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the big thing is, and listen, I appreciate these questions because that's what we're here for. But a lot of times we have to think about what is the spirit behind the question? Is the spirit behind the question to get out of doing the right thing? And if your landlord or housing provider is asking you these questions, you kind of have to read between the lines and be like, are they asking to figure out what's the way to not rent to this person? And if that's the spirit of it, then the answer is we need to accommodate to the fullest. Okay. If the answer now to your question, because listen, maybe it's a no pets, maybe there are people with severe allergies that are known, right? Then a reasonable accommodation is, listen, happy to rent to you because, or let you live in this building because that's a reasonable accommodation. You have a service animal, you have an assistance animal. However, we also have severe allergies within this building. So we're going to provide access for your housing through a different mode of transportation, which is the service elevator, to make sure that you are accommodated, as are the people with other medical conditions. That you could do. But if the whole idea is we want to make them feel as unwelcome and unwanted as possible, don't do it. Right? Like,
Vicky, that answers your questions about allergies. We have one other question about what happens if an animal is a noise nuisance.
well, so right, that's kind of goes into it. The quality of life of other people within the building should not have to suffer for an accommodation that one person is being provided, right? What I will say is that there are some ways to deny a request, but not any of them is because they're loud or noises. But it kind of goes back to what Betsy was saying, which the owner of that animal has to be able to control them. They have to be able to control them and not cause undue financial or administration burden or undue burden on anyone else living there. So at that point, the housing provider is going to want to reread all of this information, right? So that they make sure they're saying and doing all the right things. And they need to come from the spirit of, we need to talk about the noise violations and the noise complaints about this animal. We'd like to work with you on a way to make sure that we can accommodate what you need, and also we can protect the rights of everyone else living here, and then kind of go through it with that. Worst case scenario, make sure they have an attorney backing them up. Y'all are not attorneys. I know Betsy is, but we are not attorneys, real estate agents, right? And we want to make sure that we're being very careful to toe the line that we have and not breach into the giving legal advice. Right.
Correct.
So our job is to inform them of what the rights are, to guide them to these sources, like Betsy said, these unbiased sources of, hey, this is Illinois law. And when they want us to advise in a deeper territory, that's when then we can say, I'm happy to refer you to an attorney.
Yeah, and all these questions are factual variations on a theme, right? So, and if anybody who knows me, who's ever heard me talk ever, I can't do a presentation without saying it depends on the facts. So here you are. It depends on the facts. And there are cases out there that weigh the rights of one person with a disability or need for an emotional support animal with the other person that has a conflicting disability. So these things are all fact-based. And as you said, Rachel, very well, at a certain point, you're going to have to refer folks to their own attorneys.
Right.
Yep.
The key here is we are not attorneys. All right, let's move on from animals because we could talk all day long. Betsy, I'd love for you to talk about, with the NAR lawsuits taking place, clear cooperation, there's the largest fair housing case in Illinois happening right now, has over 160 instances of agents, brokers, and landlords' refusal to rent to housing choice voucher holders, which I don't know if everybody knows that housing choice voucher program is Section 8, right? We don't really say Section 8 anymore. We call it the housing choice voucher program. So can you see what you're seeing at the state level regarding that case? And then how can we as agents do better in the industry, specifically for people that hold the vouchers?
Okay, so this is the place where we teased it earlier, and so I'll talk in a little bit more detail about what's going on in the environment. Those of you in Chicago, Cook County are used to source of income being protected. In other areas in Illinois, except for the few that already had local ordinances, protecting source of income, it is kind of new. There are two actual lawsuits pending that I'm aware of. One was filed in 2024, and that woman had been on the waiting list for a housing choice voucher for 10 years, the woman that's a plaintiff. And she was routinely denied based on the fact that she was a housing choice voucher holder. HCV, I'll say, Section 8, I'll say, I mean the same thing all the time. But essentially, her allegations were she was getting slow rolled by the housing provider to accept her application. So that was a lawsuit filed in 2024. There was a lawsuit filed just as recently as this month. I think it was like Wednesday, the 9th, and you started to read about it on the 11th, that a housing agency assisting 4 Black women who say they were denied their applications moving forward. So the fact situation is kind of the same. These applications are getting slow rolled, and then they're like, no, we don't have anything available. So those are 2 actual lawsuits that are pending. There's no resolution on either one of them at this point. Obviously, the one that was just filed just this month, and then the one in 2024, I can't find decisions for them, but those are pending in Illinois courts. Then, as you alluded to, the case of the 160 plus agents, this was a housing rights advocate group that they were called a Housing Rights Initiative, and they worked with kind of undercover testers, if you will, in a sting operation, and they literally caught like 165 agents denying right out of the gate the applicants' requests based on Housing Choice Vouchers Section 8 applications. 36% of the time the person called, they were denied or slow rolled. So, and that case is pending at the Illinois Department of Human Rights. So it's an administrative case, doesn't make it any less important, because at the Department of Human Rights, the complaints are made, they are adjudicated at the administrative level, but even after that, no matter what the agency finds, the complainant will additionally have an opportunity to sue. So it isn't over. There's no resolution, so I can't really tell you how that has shaken out at this point. At the administrative level, you don't get like the docket entries as to what's happening. But I will tell you, 160, 165 agents is very concerning that folks are not getting the message. And the message is that source of income is protected throughout Illinois. So it is no longer a choice for housing providers, and it's any lawful source of income. You can't deny a person based on the fact that their income is Social Security. It is veterans benefits. It is maintenance or alimony. It is, how about this, commissions. That one should get to some of our people.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seasonal. You're a seasonal employee. The question is, can you pay? Source of income is one of them. Can you meet your obligation? If you're getting a voucher for a certain amount, what is the applicant's obligation from their own income? And can they cover that? And if they can cover that, then you got to treat them like anyone else. So just like any other protected class, a housing provider may not deny or limit based solely on the class that's protected. And in this case, it's source of income. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Allergy season.
Bless you.
One
Oh
thing
my
I want
gosh.
to add to that, you guys, is for those who think that these undercover testers don't exist, they do, right? You have to be so careful, and you have to treat every situation like you are being tested, truly, because you don't know when that's going to come around. So I just wanted to make that point.
And if I could add to that, because I had a situation with an agent this last week with a tester. The biggest thing I can give as a piece of advice is take a beat, right? There is not a requirement to respond to someone within 1 second of receiving a text message. What I see a lot is agents going really fast because we are in a fast-paced industry. We want to get to everyone. We want to get it. If I could take a page out of Rick Sobin's book, just mark something as unread and come back to it later. That's helped me immensely, because what I'm seeing is agents sort of getting themselves into trouble because they're trying to respond quickly to that individual, tester or not, right? Respond quickly and not always thinking about the fact that word choice matters. And we are licensed. We are held to a higher standard. And so we need to take a minute for ourselves, our career, frankly, and also to be better for our clients before we respond. And if you get an inquiry or a message that you're feeling like, oh my gosh, how do I respond to it? That's what your managing brokers are for. That is literally one huge part of our job, is to help you walk through it. The big thing I would encourage you is, while we don't have to get back immediately, Betsy kind of alluded to this. Part of this case was being slow rolled, right? Which is I'm ghosting the response or I'm dragging it across. So there is like a reasonable time frame. 1 second is not reasonable. All right. So definitely use us and don't fly off the cuff.
We have some
Yeah.
good questions in the chat here. Veronica says she still sees other agents on rentals still asking for proof of 3 months of income.
And I don't know whether she means 3 months of income or 3 times income to qualify. But if a person is a housing choice voucher, that person that's applying will have the voucher, and they should know what that amount is going to be. So the question is, that delta there is, some housing, and it will depend on the local housing agency. I've heard some where they won't approve unless the holder can pay for the rent with the 100% of being voucher. Other housing agencies will allow for some level of income. So it may be 3 times whatever the applicant will be responsible for, not including the voucher. So
Yeah, Veronica
that,
said she meant 3 times.
right,
And
3
that's
times the
fine,
income.
Veronica, because you can't discriminate where the money is coming from.
Right.
But you can say, what a requirement for all is 3 times the monthly rent and income. You can say that.
Mm-hmm. And then, so then the question is, can that applicant with the voucher and with whatever else they might have to provide to meet the market rent, you got to analyze it in that way. And then I'm going to answer Natasha's question right after it. I cheated and put the chat up. And it says, don't landlords need to be approved before they accept? And the answer to that question is initially no. If you get a housing choice voucher recipient as an applicant, take them in like you would any other applicant, and then you will have to get with the local housing agency to find out. There will be some space of time where you'll need to have an inspector that will come and do the basic. There's a very specific, I don't have all the dot points that you need to pass an inspection, but we have a really good broker here in town who does a lot of Section 8 housing choice voucher housing. And he's like, it's not hard to pass. Plus, any housing should pass it because it's safety, security, cleanliness. Are there pests? Does the HVAC system work? Is the electricity looking
It's
good?
things that a landlord would be responsible for.
If you're a good
regardless.
landlord, you should be able to pass these inspections. So, people like to use those. They like to throw that up as oh no, I couldn't pass the inspection. Well, what is that saying about yourself if you're a housing provider and you couldn't pass a life and safety inspection?
Yeah. We have another question. Can a landlord get pre-approved with an inspection or be in the program?
I think they can, yes. I think they can go visit with the local housing authority and see what they need to do to get themselves all set up for the program. And like I said, our guy, I have personal experience talking to him, and he said that the greatest thing for him was during COVID. He had checks rolling in, automatically deposited into his account during COVID, when other people were losing their income and couldn't pay. Now, having said that, God knows what's going to happen to the program now, but we're following it and we're studying it, and we'll probably write about it.
All right. We have about 10-ish minutes left, so I want to move on. I know we could also talk about this topic till the cows
Sure
come
could.
home, but let's move on to Rachel. Let's talk a little bit about accessible housing. Talk a little bit about reasonable modifications, reasonable accommodations. things of that nature.
Sure. So this is probably my favorite part of the topic. So I always like to say you accommodate someone, you modify something, is a really great way to kind of think about it. So a reasonable accommodation is a change, exception, or adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service, right? So that is, we're a no pets building. We're making an accommodation for this service animal, this assistance animal, okay? It could be our policy is to send everything in a written notice. And an accommodation might be, hey, I can't have a written notice because I have a visual impairment. So I actually need it to be emailed to me so my program can read it to me. That would be an example of accommodation. A reasonable modification is a structural change to the premises, okay? And really what it comes down to for modifications and accommodations is this idea of providing equal access to housing for people with disabilities. So an example again of an accommodation might be a reserved accessible parking space near the residence unit so they don't have to work as far, someone that might have a mobility or respiratory disability. Again, providing documents in alternative formats like large print or electronic. A reasonable modification, and we're thinking that's changing structure, right? We're modifying something. That could be installing grab bars in the bathroom and shower areas. That could be changing doorknobs to levers to be able to open the doors more accessibly. It can also be installing a ramp. These are really great ways to kind of think about it. And really the tip that Illinois offers, and I copied it, is if the accommodation or modification enables equal access and use of the dwelling, then it's needed. Okay. Now it cannot cause undue financial or administrative hardship. So that's where things like a ramp could be in question, right? Is that going to cost the housing provider $50,000 that they don't have? Now that's a modification that's not reasonable. Okay. That could be a modification that's not even something that they could do. And so there is protection of the housing provider in a way. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. We have to think about what is the spirit in which we are trying to find a way around. All right. Like, what is the spirit of my questioning on, do I have to make this accommodation or modification? And I just want to dip into a little bit of what accessible housing kind of looks like. Because I think during Fair Housing Month, we focus a lot on race and gender and source of income, all super, super important things. And sometimes though we forget about other types of disabilities or other types of protected classes and what that could look like. So this Fair Housing Month, I did a real deep dive on how to build more accessible housing, how to kind of modify existing housing to be more accessible, because it's no secret right now that inventory is at an all-time low. And in Chicago alone, but certainly Cook County, not only are we lacking the amount of housing needed to be able to get people off the street and into good, safe, and affordable housing, but we're really lacking accessible dwellings. And, you know, we all took the same test and we all took the same class. And really all it told us about accessibility was 36-inch wide doorways and an elevator. And when in about 2016, I actually had my first client who was in a permanent electric wheelchair. Okay. And again, all my testing had taught me was 36-inch wide doorways and an elevator. And I'm so embarrassed to say that I was woefully underprepared. For one thing, I scheduled 5 back-to-back showings in 2016 where you can't really get accessible Ubers or Lyfts. An accessible cab would take forever, and I certainly didn't have a wheelchair lift in my car. So right off the bat, huge mistake and red flag. And everything else, I was like, oh, the wheelchair can fit, that's fine. And that's when I really learned about how a room is laid out is so critical. Can they turn 360 in it? Can they reach the faucets? Are the cabinetry beneath the kitchen and bathroom sinks non-existent so they can wheel right into there? Queer Eye also had a really good episode where one of their heroes was wheelchair bound. And so they showed a lot of different ways to kind of have your closets be accessible. A few other things that I didn't even think of, but for visually impaired individuals, light filtering windows are really critical, as are even floors with no threshold lip. That's really key. Think about all of the thresholds in your your home and how so many of them, right, have like a little, like whatever that's called over the threshold that kind of connects the two types of flooring. That's really critical. For hearing impaired individuals, having smoke and carbon monoxide detectors that light up and flash, not just make noises, so that they can see when that is happening. Same thing with sound filtering, windows, all really critical, important things. And I think it's important for us to think about that when we're working with developers, and we're providing housing. NEMA Chicago is a great example of a building in Chicago that works really, really well on providing accessible dwelling. An example for that would be in their amenity area specifically. They have their indoor and outdoor pools both have wheelchair lifts. So it's not just about accessibility within the dwelling, but let's think beyond that. How can we make the amenities accessible, right? How can we make the experience of living there accessible? I just went off the rails.
No, that's no, it's so good.
I have a reel to add. Websites.
Yep.
How do the people find you? And this is a whole nother day, a whole nother session, but website accessibility is a big deal.
Yeah.
How can folks even find you?
Yep.
Right.
If
And
I
I wanted
can't
to-
see your website, can I hear it? If I can't hear your
Right.
website, can I read it? So there's a whole look up website accessibility, and the acronym, I finally got that word in my head,
Yes.
is
acronym.
WCAG. It's WCAG, website something accessibility guidelines. So
Renee asked, can the client pay for the modification?
yes.
So the answer is yes, right? Like again, a reasonable modification and accommodation can't cause undue financial or administrative harm. And so that is an opportunity where the housing provider can say, hey, I know that I would love to build a ramp. I just like financially can't afford it. I cannot do this reasonable modification as an example, right? The client or the person looking for that housing can offer to pay for it.
All right. We have a whole 5 minutes left. Before I wrap, I would like to give each of you a chance to leave us with some sage advice and some parting words. Rachel, let's start with you.
Okay. Think before you speak or type or text or email. And then also, I would encourage all of you to go to NAR's website and play a game that they created called Fairhaven. It actually just got a facelift. It's 2.0 right now. They have gamified the ability to really experience fair housing through real violations that have occurred in our industry, and you're sort of playing the realtor in it. And so you can kind of pick and choose your own adventure, and it really opens your eyes to what are different types of violations out there. Some things that you might have as part of your nomenclature that you're learning maybe are not the right thing to say or do. So it's free. You get a nice, pretty star and certificate afterwards. But if that is like the one thing you take away from this, go to NAR's website, log in through your portal, and take the Fairhaven course. It's really great. It's quick, very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Betsy, how about you?
Okay, well, I will dovetail on Rachel and say that Fairhaven is excellent. I just did 2.0 last week, and it's really good, and it's not super easy, but don't be afraid of it, because if you apply the concepts that we talked about today, like not substituting your own ideas, beliefs, prejudices, biases for your client or customer, you're going to fly. And if you also are truly an advocate in the real estate industry, you're going to pass with flying colors. But it's really worthwhile. Plus, you'll get your 2 hours of fair housing requirement for your Realtor Code of Ethics training. So there's that. Also, someone asked about me to repeat the name of our legal hotline attorney. So that's a very valuable resource for Realtor members. And her name is Vicki Munson, M-U-N-S-O-N, Vicki Munson. She is reachable at 800-952-0578. That's our actual legal hotline number. Or at legal department, spelled out, at Illinois Realtors, plural, all spelled out, .org. So that's a really good resource among all the others that are going to be sent to you. And One little point I wanted to make, and I'll do it as quickly as possible, but what law do we follow? We've got federal law, we've got state law, and we've got local ordinances, all dealing with human rights and fair housing. So which do we follow? And my answer to that question is you follow the strictest one. So federal has like, what, 7 or 8 protected classes. Our state has more protected classes than that, and many locals have many more protected classes. So you would follow the strictest of those 3. A lot of times that's going to be your local ordinance. Okay, so that's it. Thank you again for having me.
Angela, you're muted, but I'm believing that you're telling us how fabulous we are. And
Of course, thank you. I'm trying to wrap it up and get you guys out on time, but on the slide, you can see some additional resources. We will be posting some of this information on the Ad Agent app in platform under the coaching and training section. And we'll also be posting this in Ad Academy as a course that you can take, linked to the resources that we're sending you. And I think my takeaway here and my suggestions to you guys is make fair housing a part of your everyday, not just something that we think about in April every year, right? Like it's great that you're all here and learning all the information, but let's now take it into real life and think about it during all of your daily ins and outs of the business, right? So that's my challenge to you. So what's coming up next? We have next week, you have an in-office roundtable. You will be practicing your value prop with your peers if you're interested in that. Also, keep your eye out for some really exciting things coming from coaching and training over the next few months. We're changing up our program a bit, but keep your eye on the coaching and training room on the Ad Agent app, and we'll also be sending some emails for some new training opportunities coming up. So Rachel and Betsy, thank you so much. We're getting a ton of comments in the chat about how great this webinar was. Thank you guys for being with us, and I hope you all have a great week. See you soon.